Lloyd, it's so great to have you on the podcast. I've known you for a long time. Your reputation is impeccable. It's deep with your relationship with the Everglades, and we'll talk about your induction into the BTT Circle of Honor here in a little bit. But let's just start with your house in your backyard. You don't not only love the Everglades, you live the Everglades.
Yeah. In 1992, we had Hurricane Andrew, and I had a little grove back there in the backyard with mango trees and avocado trees, and they all got uprooted, laying on the ground. We hauled all that stuff away and had a huge yard. And, I was trying to think what we could do with the yard, and a friend of mine, Cliff Cundy, of blessed memory, he's not with us anymore. He said, what would you like to do with the yard? I said, I'd love to have a pond back here and create a little Everglades back here. So he said, let's do it. I said, you have the knowledge to do it? He said, yeah. He said, I studied hydrology and all that stuff. He says, we could do it, just the two of us. So that started it. We took leaves and we made a pattern of the perimeter of the pond and then started digging.
Digging and planting and transplanting fish?
Well, first thing we dug out the pond, and we took all the dirt from the pond and made a berm to go around the pond. And we didn't plant it yet. And we had to put some concrete on the bottom, and all the concrete trucks were going by. And just like in Key West, when you'd get some bait from the shrimp boats, they'd have concrete left over from a job, and they'd have to dump it. So we'd flag them down, give them some beer, and they'd give us the concrete, and we'd dump it in the pond in the places where we needed to fight the percolation.
Right.
So then we built the pond, then we finally got to fill it with water, built the waterfall. And then the next thing you know, Cliff says, he says, we got to put some fertilizer in there. I said, what? He said, yeah, you got to fertilize it to seed it. Okay, so we put the fertilizer in, and the beautiful clear water turned to green muck. I said, Cliff, what are you thinking? And then, sure enough, after about a week, it cleared up. Water was beautiful. He says, okay, now we could plant it. And we did.
I mean, it's amazing. You walk out there, you have a little, feeding platform. You've got snook. You've got two 20-pound tarpon in there, and you're downtown Miami. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, people drive by. They have no idea what's behind the fence.
I mean, I asked you to come up to Boca to do this interview, and you said, nah, I'd rather do it here. Now I see why. You wanted me to see your little paradise here. Well, you walk in the front door, and you see this big painting, and which was in Herman Lucerne's house when Hurricane Andrew struck, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was in his Florida room, and it got pretty beat up after the hurricane. Of course, Herman died during the hurricane. He was trying to board up a window from the inside that had been violated by the hurricane, and he had a heart attack while he was boarding up the window. So I went by the next day to see, what needed to be done. And this painting, which he always promised that he'd give to me, was there getting wet, And so I brought it home, told his sister about it, that I had it. And she said, Herman always said he wanted you to have it.
Yeah,
so I said, it's a highwayman. I think it's the only 4x8 highwayman painting ever made. You saw it.
It's a beautiful
view of the Everglades.
Beautiful. Well, we're going to talk about your relationship with Herman here in a second, but Bonefish Tarpon Trust, BTT, is honoring you this spring with the Stewardship Award. And let me just write something that the president, Jim McDuffie, sent me regarding this award that you're receiving. He says, Lloyd Wruble is a great champion of the resource that anglers hold dear. Over the years, Lloyd has witnessed many changes impacting the water, habitats, and fish populations of South Florida and the Keys. He resolved to do something about it, whether it's working on the front lines or behind the scenes to influence change. You'll find Lloyd Wruble, the angler, conservationist, community leader, and flat steward. BTT is honored to recognize your work, Lloyd Wruble, to protect and defend the industry, the fishery, with the 2023 Flats Stewardship Award. I mean, it's a circle of honor. It's their Hall of Fame. What do you think about this?
I was blown away when I heard I was selected, because I really don't think of myself as that caliber of a person to be elected to the Circle of Honor, but I guess other people do, and that's very very rewarding. And it all goes back to Herman. Herman got me interested in doing it because Herman also did a lot and was active.
For sure. Tell me about who Herman Lucerne was.
Well, Herman he had a packing plant, avocado and mango packing plant. At one time, he owned over 2,000 acres in the Redlands of avocado and mango trees. He was doing very well. And then Hurricane Donna hit, wiped out all his groves.
That was in 60-something?
60, I think it was 60.
Right.
And, of course, he had all these mortgages on the land that he couldn't pay without the plants. So he had to sell just about all of the property. But he had a love of fishing. He was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm from Wilkes-Barre area, Pennsylvania. And he was in the Army and saw action in Europe and came down to Florida to live in Florida City, and had a fruit stand on Chrome Avenue when he was young, became mayor of Florida City. But he loved the Everglades, and he'd drive down. His home wasn't far from the old dirt road that took you to Flamingo. So he used to go there every day, and he became friendly. I can't remember with the name of the guy who taught him, but he learned Hells Bay. He told me the guy had an inboard, and he would go back to Hells Bay with an inboard. I don't know how in the world he did that, but he did. And then Herman had canoes stashed everywhere, because you'd go to one of the canoes, get out of the boat, and then go canoe fishing.
It's crazy that he did that back then, because the fishing was epic out front of Flamingo. You didn't have to go deep into Hells Bay and in the backcountry.
Well, that's true, but if you wanted solace and you wanted quiet, you didn't want to see other boats running around, it's beautiful back there. It's just so serene. I could understand why he did it. And the fishing back there was fabulous also. It was the same. And it just takes you, like half hour to get there. It's not like it's a long ride or anything.
Right. It's just remote. Now they have the Herman Lucerne Memorial Tournament, and the trophy given to the winners of the tournament is the Lloyd Wruble trophy. Yeah,
I had two of my friends, Kevin Burns and Richard Trotta, surprised me one year, and they had it made. David Worth made it. It's a beautiful trophy. It's in Florida Keys Outfitters.
Right.
And it has all 7 species carved out of wood on the trophy.
Yeah, so that just says so much about you and your relationship with Herman. Do you remember when you first met him and how he influenced you to become a backcountry Everglades guy?
I certainly did, because I used to fish offshore. That's what, when I first started fishing, I fished offshore, and I was fortunate to be off every Wednesday from the day I started practice, and every Wednesday I'd want to go fishing. And if the wind was blowing 3 to 5, you're sort of iffy, because I only had a 20-foot dusky. Should I go or shouldn't I go? And if you go, it could be miserable out there. And if you don't go, you're miserable because you couldn't go. So you're miserable both ways. So Dennis' friend, Sam Porco, invited me to go fish Flamingo. He knew Herman because they both lived in the same area. And I went and he introduced me to Herman, took me backcountry fishing, and as soon as he took me back there, I fell in love with it. I said, this is what I want to do.
You were home.
Yeah, and there was another guy with me, Ken Grossman, who was a friend at the time. He fell in love with it quickly, and he went and he bought a dolphin, 18-foot dolphin with I think it had 135 or 150 horsepower more. But he didn't know anything about handling, what to do with a boat. So he'd invite me all the time to go with him. So the three of us would go, and the first thing we learned was the rivers. We learned the Harney River, Broad Creek, Rogers River, Wood River, where every oyster bar was, when to be there, and we used to catch so many fish, and we had some great times. But after a while, Kenny wanted to show his prowess, his ability now, so he started inviting other people, and he'd invite me. And Kenny would be fishing, I would be the mate, helping out the other person, you know, which I didn't mind because I wanted, I enjoy watching other people catch fish. I have to catch the fish. And so I started fishing with Herman by myself a little more as Kenny branched off and started doing his own thing on the rivers. And Herman says, what would you like to learn in Hills Bay? I said, I want to learn anything you're willing to teach me. He said, well, let's start going to Hills Bay. So we'd go back in his Omona hull boat. It was a 20-foot with a 200 horsepower inline Merc. And we'd go back there as far as he could take it and then jump out, get in a canoe, paddle, go catch as many 6 to 9 pound redfish as you want. And
never see anybody.
Yeah, never would see another person. And then I figured I could build an aluminum boat that could go anywhere that canoe goes. So I had one built in Arkansas, and they delivered it here, and I took Herman out in it. And we never had to get in that canoe again.
No more paddling.
No more paddling. We went as far back as we could go with the canoe, and we did it I fished with them for like 18, 19 years. We'd cut out creeks. We wouldn't ruin the tree. And I really think that people not going back there now, there's no drainage. It's all closing in. The mangroves, mangroves are a good thing.
Right.
But they also decrease the water and the fishing back there. There's a place called...
It blocks the
flow of the water.
Right.
And there was a Lane River rookery with beautiful ponds in there that the park used to go to. They'd have to portage canoes to get there and everything. Right. And we knew a way to get there by boat. And we'd go by boat and go fishing there. But it was difficult to get to, so we stopped going back there. And I went back there. The last time I went back there, it was all mangroves. No ponds, nothing.
It takes a big effort to
and then there's no
that.
Roosting area. It's no good for the birds either because there's no food source in those ponds for the birds to eat. And now there's no rookery there anymore. So, I'm not a biologist or anything like that, but, I see mangroves are a good thing, but in some places they get overgrown too. You get the mangrove forest, but they get rid of the water. They create land, but they get rid of the water. So
yeah, right.
So it all depends on what you want, I guess.
So initially, because it can be quite intimidating back there. And back in the day when there was no GPS, you probably learned all this stuff with aerial photographs, right?
Yeah, there were architectural firms that had aerial photographs, but there'd be clouds over the area you want to see and stuff. And it was difficult, but every night I'd be studying those aerials to learn. I mean, I was a real student of those.
Right. Did you ever get lost back there?
No, I've never got lost. I had trouble one day where the engine broke down, and I called Herman. I had a push pole, and I'd put the VHF radio at the antenna at the top of the push pole and hold it up. And I was able to get through to Herman. Called somebody who called Herman. That's another thing. When I started fishing with Herman, none of those places had names. So I said, Herman, how can we talk to each other and say, hey,
how can you come find me?
Yeah, and where the fish are. Where'd you fish yesterday? Oh, I fished over here. I said, we have to name these bays. So we named Gaps and Snook Bay, and we had all kinds of names for the different bays so we could communicate.
Right.
So I got stuck right outside of Snook Bay, and I called him, and he came and pulled me out. That was the only time and I borrowed his other boat. It wasn't my boat that I got stuck because he didn't take real good care of his
stuff. Tell me about the houseboat he used to have.
He had a houseboat called the Snookery in Flamingo, right? And Ted Jurassic had a houseboat next to Herman. So we knew each other, and we'd go on houseboat trips. We had certain places where we'd anchor in Oyster Bay and Whitewater Bay, or take it all the way up to Tarpon Bay and spend a few days. I mean, those were wonderful times.
What was the fishing like back then?
It was incredible. I mean, when I first started fishing Hills Bay, I would say it was 90% redfish.
And what year?
Now it's 90% snook.
And what year was that?
76, something like 75.
Long time ago.
So, yeah.
And obviously, I can't imagine you guys seeing anybody back there.
No, we never saw anybody. Yeah.
So the new film, have you seen the new film with Steve Huff? It's named
I
Huff.
did. Yes, I did. Huff. I did. It's fantastic.
When I see him pulling his skiff, through the mangroves and trying to, separate, the branches, what do you think when you see that?
Oh, I think of what we used to do all the time.
That was your life.
Oh, that was my life back there. And what we used to do, when we want to open up an area, you could look at the bottom. If you see shells, there's a lot of flow going through there, but there'd be a mangrove wall.
So you had to cut a hole through it.
So you had to cut a hole through it, and we didn't, and so we did, but we didn't want to get lost coming back. So we used to get toilet paper. We put toilet paper at the entrance, drape it over one of the branches, go through, and at the end we'd put toilet paper and, just keep going.
Yeah, I was thinking ribbons, No,
ribbons are permanent.
Right.
So we started coming back one day, went way back there, and we're trying to come back and can't find any toilet paper. We said, what's going on here? And then we'd find the thing, we'd find the cuttings and know that that's where we came through. Then we'd go through and still no toilet paper. Well, finally we made ourselves, got out, and we're on our way to another area, and we see this osprey nest covered with toilet paper. It was great nesting material. So he picked up
all your markings.
So now what we do after that is we just break off a branch, just break it and let it hang.
Right.
And your eyes pick it up immediately. The
difference of the angle.
Yeah, the difference of the angle. So we started doing that when we'd explore.
Talk about Ted Jurassic and Herman Memorial Plaque.
Well,
so he was buried out there?
No, he wasn't buried out there. He wanted to be buried out there, and his sister wanted him buried out there, but he had a brother who was very religious, who didn't believe in cremation, and he wouldn't agree to have Herman cremated because Herman has cousins, brother-in-laws back there, that he would spread the ashes out there. But when it came time for him, his brother just wouldn't have any of it. And
so he's
buried.
Well, we're just going to drop his body back there.
He's buried. He's buried in a cemetery in Homestead.
Mm-hmm. So where was that plaque placed? One of his favorite fishing grounds?
Right before the Gap. We call it the Gap. Gap number 1. It's right there. He had a bottle of Grand McNish, which was his favorite scotch.
Uh-huh.
And there's a plaque that Ted had made. It says, Herman Lucerne, the dates he was born and died, and it said, "The Man of the Everglades." And it's there. The bottle's gone. I guess the line broke or something. And I'll replace it one day when I go back there.
Right. But Ted Jurassic was a big member of the Everglades and you guys.
Yeah, he well,
he was a big pal, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny story because I didn't get along real well with Ted in the beginning, and I never knew what the reason was. But even Flip was a little distant to me because I never went back with them to show them.
So you weren't part of the brotherhood yet?
No. Well, Herman told me, don't show it to anybody. He made me promise that I wouldn't show the Everglades to anybody.
Interesting.
And I was true to my word. And so I never, even though I was friendly with Flip, I liked him and Ted, I just never went back there. And they thought, I think that maybe I was selfish or something like that,
right.
that I wouldn't share any information with them. And then I think I told Flip, and without me knowing, Herman would go out with Ted and Flip. He wouldn't tell me that. He
was already showing those guys.
He was already showing them, but he would never tell me that. He just said, don't show anybody. And so there was a little distance there, but one time we were going to do a houseboat trip to Tarpon Bay, and Flip and said, Lloyd's a great guy, you gotta meet him, and see how he is.
Yeah.
You gotta give him a chance. So we went to this house on the houseboat in Tarpon Bay, and there was this terrible lightning storm that came through. The boats were getting, rain. We had to make sure that they were tied off good, and we had to go out in the rain and stuff like that. And I was doing all that stuff, and Ted saw that I wasn't just going to sit in the houseboat while they were doing all that stuff. And we developed a relationship after that, and I went fishing with Ted many times after that. And he was so funny. He had a spot. He'd fish this area that's real tough to navigate, He had one spot. It was a special tree, and he named that tree Not to Worry. Not to worry. He said, "There's not to worry. We're okay."
And the way he speaks, he's awesome.
Not to worry.
We did a podcast with Ted, and he was speaking about his life. And
that was one of my favorites.
He was.
Podcasts. That's the one.
Ted Jurassic's life, is just remarkable in every way, and everybody should listen to Ted Jurassic's story, escaping the Hungarian Revolution and how he made his way to the United States and how great of an inventor he was.
One of the brightest guys I know. If there was ever a problem or something that had to be figured out, he'd be the man.
You want to go into the backcountry with that guy.
Yeah.
In case you got stuck somehow, he'd figure a way to get out.
Well, I helped him a little in the back. He always had trouble going around curves.
Corners.
And when he went out with me in my boat, as soon as I get ready to go around the corner, I'd give it a little gas, and it'll dig in.
To turn the bow.
To turn the bow, he says. Wow. He said, that's neat the way you do that. He says, I never knew that. And I was impressed with myself that I got maybe to teach him one thing, because he's one of the brightest guys I know.
Let's go back to Hurricane Andrew. You were right in the eye of it. It came over.
Yeah, it came over this house.
In this area.
Came over this house and destroyed Herman's house. And
killed Herman.
Yeah, killed Herman. He was one of the casualties of Hurricane Andrew. And it took me a while. I mean, I was so close to him, fishing 2 and 3 days a week for that many years. We really, it took me a while to get over that. It was tough.
What was the hurricane like? Did you stay here?
Oh, we
in
were
your home?
Yeah, we were in the hall there. My ears were popping, windows were crashing, and it was a horrible thing. I don't think I'd ever want to sit through another hurricane.
What kind of damage did this house?
Well, I had roof damage, window damage, door damage, walls wet that had to be
replaced?
torn down, and Flip's house was just absolutely destroyed.
Right, the roof came
and
off
I
his
felt
house.
so bad because I wanted to help Flip, but at the same time I had so much going on
Right.
in my house I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because he really had, I mean, he was living in his pickup truck for a while.
Right.
And I really felt bad, but a lot of people were in that shape after that hurricane.
I kind of wonder that, did you guys know the Everglades and that country better than the guys that were part of FWC and the Rangers?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
Did they learn from you? Did they have
No, they didn't know how to. They didn't know how to get back there. They, like you were talking about earlier, they'd put red tape on trees.
Right.
And go back there one day. One day I'm in the back. I see all this tape, red tape on the trees. So I started removing them.
Oh, no.
I started removing the tape. And as I was coming out, I saw this Ranger. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm taking the tape off the trees." He says, "Well, I put them there so I could find my way." I said, "You're not allowed to do that." I said, "That's against the park rules. You're trashing the Everglades. Here's how you get home. Go down there, make a right and then a left, and that'll get you out to the river and you could go home."
Right.
So I come back to the ramp, and there's the head ranger, the chief ranger there. He says, "Dr. Wruble, I heard you had a little run-in with a ranger." Well, I didn't know it was a ranger. He didn't have his clothes on.
Right.
His jacket on. I said, "No, I didn't have any trouble with a ranger." He says, "Well, we had a ranger back there in a canoe doing a little exploring." He says, "I understand you took down all his red tags and told him not to put them up there anymore." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I don't want to go back there and see red tags and mangroves." I said, you shouldn't be doing that." He says, "Dr. Wruble," he says, "you let us do the enforcing." He says, "You could fish, but let us do the enforcing. Please don't be a ranger." I said, "Okay." All right.
You have a list of a number of things here. You say here, Coke cans and alligators. What's that all about?
Well, we when we find a good spot catching snook, a lot of times an alligator would be in the area trying to eat the snook or get to the boat and harassing all the fish and everything like that. But if you take an empty Coke can, I don't recommend it, I wouldn't do it anymore, and you put it in the water, it'll float, and the alligator would go up and grab the Coke can and crunch it. It would crunch it. It would kind of be like a little kid with a rattle, and he'd swim away, go into the mangroves, and we'd be fishing. We'd hear
chewing on the Coke cans.
Chewing on it. He wouldn't eat it, but he just liked the sound of the can.
Do you see any saltwater crocs back there?
Well, not in the back, not in Hell's Bay. Lake
just
Ingram.
alligators.
Out front, you see saltwater crocodiles.
I remember used to see them over in Flamingo in the channel going out.
Now I see more at our golf course, Deering Bay, than I do at Flamingo. They're all over.
It's crazy. You just saw that woman on the news that just got nipped by an alligator.
Yeah.
Walking her dog.
They're in the Keys, too. They're behind my home in the Keys.
You had a good relationship with Joe DiMaggio. How'd that come to be?
Well, I met so many well-known people through fishing, more so than my practice of oral surgery. I think I got more opportunities through fishing than I did through oral surgery. There was this guy, Nick Nicolosi, who wanted to fish the Everglades. So he did his own research, and he found out that Herman was the man, and he called up Herman, "Would you take me and my buddy Joe DiMaggio fishing?" So Herman said, sure. Herman being Italian,
sure.
And Joe DiMaggio being the bomber, he said, "Sure, I'll take you." So he did. He came down and he took him fishing, and then he started asking me to come along on the trips to help out. And then as Herman got older, I started taking them out.
Do you ever talk about Marilyn Monroe?
That's one thing you couldn't talk to him about. It's fun. He came down and stayed at my house in the Keys, and he was on the deck. And Nick says, you should do a video and interview him like you're interviewing me.
Right.
So he said, but just don't mention Marilyn Monroe. And I did. And I can't find that tape. I mean, it was he talked about everything except Marilyn Monroe. I mean, we'd be in the house. Nick was a cook. He's Italian cook. He loved to cook. I did the dishes, and DiMaggio had to dry the dishes. So I have a video of him in his skivvies drying dishes, being a regular guy,
Interesting.
So we had a lot of interesting. He wasn't a really accomplished fisherman. He just liked being out away from everybody, because everywhere he would go, somebody would come up to him and interrupt him.
Right.
And
did you fish with Ted Williams?
I never fished with Ted Williams.
He was in the Keys a lot.
But I'll tell you a story about Ted. I had met him, but I never fished with him. I was supposed to go down to Keys. Nick called me up one day and he says, we're going to come down. Can you go fishing? So I said, I could go fishing Saturday, but I can't be with you Friday because I've got surgery scheduled. So he says, well, Joe and I will just stay in your house, So they went down to Worldwide Sportsman, which was that little tackle shop then. And George Hummel was in there. And George Hummel sees DiMaggio walk into his tackle shop. So he said to Nick, he said, would you mind watching the store for 5 minutes? I'll be right back. I have to go somewhere. So he leaves the house and he comes back with Ted Williams. So in the shop is Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, Nick, and George. They had a nice conversation. Ted Williams invited Joe and Nick to come to their house for dinner that night. Nick said they were talking about how you could tell whether a guy's throwing a curve or a fastball. And both of them said, nothing to it. He said, you just look at the strings on the baseball. And if the strings are straight, it's a fastball.
It's crazy because that ball's going over 80 miles an hour.
Exactly.
Close to 90.
90 miles an hour. But they were able to see the strings on the baseball. They had such good and they both admitted that. But anyway, I could have been there. That was one of the missed things that.
Who other person in your life that may have inspired you in your fishing, in your conservation efforts?
Well, I think I have to credit it all to Herman, because early on, because before I met Herman, the park wanted to make Hills Bay and that whole area we fish kayaks and paddle only. And Herman fought that. And there was a judge by the name of Judge Mertens who helped him out a lot. And he fought that with the park, and they decided not to do it. Well, wouldn't you know, it came up again on the last management plan that they wanted to make that all kayak and canoe fishing. I couldn't go back there in my boat anymore.
And there's so much space back there. Why not? And it's inaccessible.
Well, they had a superintendent at that time who listened. Before that, none of the superintendents, they always set a plan. They'd have public hearings, but they always knew what they wanted to do. But this particular superintendent, Dick Kimball, was fantastic. He listened and made decision based on what he heard. So I said, Dick, you got to come with me and see the area before you do the management plan. So he got in my boat, and I took him everywhere. I took him in Hills Bay. I mean, we spent like 4 hours riding around in the backcountry.
Places that you would never be able to get to in a canoe.
Because it's so far away.
Right.
And then you have to be able to get out.
Sure.
So he said, Lloyd, he said, I'm glad you brought me back here because this area of the park is beautiful and people should be able to enjoy it like you do. And if it was just canoes and kayaks, nobody'd ever see it. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever used it. So they took it out of the management plan.
Nice.
And so I felt like I made some contribution,
For sure.
you know.
The rest of the world, we see such big changes with the water quality, and we're talking about Captains for Clean Water, all the great work they're doing, the lack of fresh water. Have you seen a big difference in the Everglades and where you fish over the years?
Oh, sure. And the numbers of fish, the amount of vegetation back there. Yeah, it's a lot different. It's not like it, nowhere is it like it used to be. But you could see the difference. It hasn't affected the quality. The water's still clear as a bell back there, and it's still nice. I don't know why. I'm trying. Can't figure out where the flow comes from, that keeps it clean. And then in Florida Bay, you have all that algae and everything like that. The water's still pretty clean.
Do you think the salinity is a little bit higher?
No, because I use a salinity. I check the salinity. I test it when I go back there, and you still get completely fresh water, and you catch snook, bass in the same water, tarpon.
Right.
So you catch them in the same water. I don't see any difference in the salinity. That area is mostly, it's not tidal. It's mostly wind driven. When you have the king high tides, then you do get an elevation of the water, but the water stays pretty stagnant.
Is there a line that that's different with the salinity versus the fresh water, and the fishing may change with that line?
When I was fishing with Herman, he used to like to fish the salinity line where fresh water meets salt water.
Was the fishing better on that line?
Yeah.
It's almost like a tide line on the offshore stuff, right?
The edge of the blue water, stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like.
Once you got further into the fresh water, you're probably catching largemouth bass, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the largemouth bass.
It's pretty cool because you can really pick your species depending on the water.
Exactly. It's incredible.
Where would you like to go with this conversation at this point?
Well, obviously there's a lot of things to be done with clean water, getting some fresh water down the Everglades. I see they just broke ground for the Everglades reservoir, and I'd like to see that done, and I'd like to see us get more land so we could purify that water so it could go to the park.
Right.
I mean, just because we're storing the water there doesn't mean that it could go to the park unless it meets the standards, the federal standards.
Right.
For phosphorus. So I'm just hoping that we could do that.
Right.
And when, I was originally with towards the end of the Everglades Protection Association, then they gave all their funds to the coastal, who was then called Florida Conservation Association. I was on the board with the forming committee with Pete Peacock, Alex Jernigan, and a couple others to form the Florida Conservation Association, which I thought was going to be heavy into conservation, but they're heavy into fish, conservation, hatcheries, things like that. Because I guess it's a political organization, they didn't want to get involved with problems with algae and releases and things like that, because they casually mention it, but they never really strongly supported it, and that kind of bothered me. I was a life member of the coastal. So a guy by the name of Chris Maroney had a home in Stewart, and he was fed up because he had all this algae around the back of his house and everything. And I guess he did pretty good in the technical world, and he seeded bull sugar. And at first I was kind of offended at bull sugar, and then the more I thought about it, at that time not many politicians or anybody was listening about the problem, and bull sugar became very vocal.
Right.
Making demands and picketing, going going to special political events and yelling, clean the water and stuff like that. And that's what I think really kicked off the movements that are available today. Now our Everglades Coalition formed.
Right.
And, Vote Water Bull Sugar became Vote Water. And I think that really got the organizations going.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen a difference in the bird population and the bird life back there by chance?
Well, the numbers are down. I think they're a little up now compared to what they were for a while. But
right.
Yeah, the numbers are, greatly reduced. I used to see wood storks all the time. I don't remember the last time I saw a wood stork back there.
I see here you have spoonbill feathers in Herman's houseboat. What's that all about?
Well, during the drug running days, there was some drug running going on around Chokoloskee and stuff, and Herman I guess he took his houseboat up there, and they suspected that Herman turned them in because a couple of guys got caught. So
how would Herman know what they were doing? Just seeing them run at night and stuff?
I guess, or listening to them on the radio on their special channels. Because Herman knew them,
Right.
He knew a lot of them. But one day he gets a knock on the houseboat, and it's some federal guys. They said, we heard you're collecting feathers for sale. And they went into the hold of his houseboat, and there were a whole bunch of spoonbill feathers. Well, somebody had shot.
Were they protected at the time?
Oh, sure they were. So he had a lot of explaining to do, and he eventually talked his way out of it because Herman had a reputation. He wasn't gonna.
What was he doing with spoonbill feathers?
That's what they asked him. He says, "I didn't put them there. No, somebody."
Oh, he got set up from the drug guys.
He got set up from
when he
the
was out
drug
fishing one day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he didn't know what he was going to do, but he was able to talk his way out of it.
When did that era of the drug running? Was it pretty vibrant when you were fishing with Herman back in the day?
I think it was sort of towards the end when I started fishing with him.
Right.
It was still going on, but sort of towards the end of it. I don't know too much about it.
Yeah. Do you see any of the square groupers back in the Everglades or in the Gulf by chance?
No. I've seen them in the ocean when you ocean fished, but I haven't seen any in the Glades.
Once you found out what the Everglades was all about, did you stop your oceanside fishing? Did you sell that boat?
Yeah. I sold the boat, and I got that aluminum boat, and I had a bone fisher for a while. Yeah, I went backcountry. I used to fish with John Dudas, kite fishing, because his mate was a good friend of mine.
Right.
And Dudas would take us out every Christmas Eve. He'd go out with his friends on a fun trip and go out catching, kite fishing.
Sure.
So I learned how to do all that stuff, but once I got into backcountry fishing, I didn't want to do anything else.
Would you consider yourself a real pioneer of the Everglades? We know Herman was.
I don't know whether I'd consider him. I opened up a lot of areas that he didn't
fish.
Right. But I'm an explorer of the Everglades.
Right.
I don't know whether I'd consider myself a pioneer. But the fact that I continued going back there, I think, encouraged other people to want to learn that area and go back there. So maybe
you took the knowledge from Herman and pursued it.
Right.
But do you think that type of fishing is a dying breed? You're seeing a lot of these canals, these tight channels that mangroves are starting to overgrow and block. Do you think that passion to go deeper and further?
Well, like I went about a month ago with this guy, and we went to a place called East River Rookery. And I could tell nobody's been there for I don't know how long, because it was all growing in. and I broke through the mangroves, and I was able to get in, and we saw, what we used to see. I mean, yeah, I think guys are going back there, but I don't think they're expanding. They find a place where they're comfortable fishing, and that's where they'll fish. They're not venturing deep into the Everglades.
So you're a dying breed.
There's a lot of opportunity there to do it, but it's tough. A guide can't take all his clients back there. You have to take an accomplished angler back there to fish, because otherwise all they'd be doing is pulling plugs and lures out of trees all day.
Right.
Because it's a real tight area to fish. I took a friend back there, Ben Monroe from Colorado, and he was a fly fisherman. He didn't spin fish or plug fish or anything like that. I didn't know what I was going to do, but it was amazing how he did back there. I mean, he,
change the angle up,
back cast up in the air and then cast down and
roll cast.
I mean, he was incredible. And we caught so many fish on fly, but it's a difficult area. I mean, you take the average fly caster. I mean, there's certain spots where you can do it, obviously, but he was fabulous. That was a good day.
Do you ever find any big tarpon back in there?
No, I think 40, 50 pound
maximum.
Max, yeah.
So it's almost like a nursery for a lot of fish.
I mean, one day, I took Dave Denkert and Mark Croca back there one day. That was
I can't imagine that day.
I tell you, there wasn't one fish that escaped. Not one. I mean, they were depleters. They were so deadly. I mean, there's one. And Mark has eyes like an eagle. I mean, I've never seen anybody with eyes like that.
And how about his casting ability with his splashless cast, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had so much fun that day because, when you get good anglers back there, you could have a great day.
I guess you don't have to worry about feeding the fish. You just show them the bug and they're going to bite.
Yeah, they're those fish will eat back there because, I mean, you go back there. Sometimes you don't see any bait. Sometimes you'll see big schools of mahara. And when you find that, you're in heaven because around the corner there's going to be some big snook.
Right.
Because they love mahara.
I'm just trying to take a look here. Maybe look at something that we haven't covered.
When I was telling you about Ted and Flip, Ted
Jurassic. Ted Jurassic and Flip.
Right, they wanted to let me know that they were learning that place. So Ted went to the trouble, made all these aluminum signs, and numbered them, and put them out there in various positions, but in no order. He'd put 16 here, 3 here, 2 over here, and he figured I'd go out there and try to figure out what in the hell are those, But I knew there's only one person that would go to all that trouble.
It was a joke on you.
It was a joke on me, and I knew it. So what did I do? I did what I did with those red tapes.
Pulled them all.
Pulled them all off, and I'm going to show them at when I get at the Circle of Honor. I'm going to bring. I gave one to Flip, and I'm going to show it when I get to Circle of Honor. It was quite funny.
Who's the next crusader that's going to take on your role
and
keep those waterways open?
I don't know.
Are you worried about the future of that fishery?
Well, I mean, I'm not worried about it. I'd like to see people keeping it open, but I don't know. I don't know who would do it. The guides don't have time to do it, I don't think.
You think a lot of these little nooks and crannies that you created are going to go away?
Yeah, I do.
Is that sad for you?
Yeah, it is, because it's so beautiful back there, so quiet and tranquil that I hate not to be able to see other people enjoying it.
Right, because you're 79, turning 80 very soon.
Yep.
When you look back, what comes to mind?
I've been very lucky. I was lucky to have a wife, an understanding wife, who let me from a young age fish 2, sometimes 3 days a week. I had a great profession, which it enabled me to do a lot of the things I do. I'm able to go to North Carolina for 6 months. I'm a nomad. I'm here in Miami, 3 days a week and 4 days a week. Then I go down the Keys 3 days a week. I have the best of every world, and I just feel great family, kids, grandkids. I'm just fortunate to have been able to do it. If you would have asked me when I was 35 years old, I found out I had a heart defect, and I had to have open heart surgery. So, and that's the time when I was starting to make a decent income. And so that's why we're still in the house, because if something happened, I didn't want to buy a bigger home, because if something happened to me, my wife wouldn't be able to pay the mortgage, and she'd have to move.
Sure.
But this home was, basically paid off. So I stayed here and instead bought a place in the Keys. So we had a second home in the Keys. So that's why we're still here, and we're happy here. We have we've built it into a nice, comfortable place to stay.
Yeah. Well, obviously your heart is filled with a passion for fishing. You're being honored this spring by the BTT organization. What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of my accomplishment, what I accomplished with the park. I'm proud of the tournament I started, Herman Lucerne Memorial, which in the beginning was problematical because we gave money to the park. And a lot of the guides at that time resented the park because the park wasn't putting money into the park and fixing it up, the docks and things like that. But they didn't have the understanding that the superintendent had to work with the funds that were allotted to the park.
Right.
And he couldn't just go up there and say, I need $1 million, I want to do this. It didn't happen that way. So we used to take the funds and give it to the park for navigation markers, to repair the docks so the boats don't go under the docks. We made a lot of improvements in the park. But it was difficult to get people to understand that, that it's not the park, it's the funding that they get, that they needed money to do those things. And then as we went along, then we saw that the biggest problem in the park right now is water quality, not the docks or the navigation markers or anything. So we started directing our funds towards clean water.
Right.
And I'm proud of everything I did, towards clean water, the kayak paddle areas, pole troll zones, keeping them just in snake bite, not making them throughout the bay like they planned. And where there was a entrance, because of my relationship with the superintendent, where you had a pole or troll through 7 feet of water to get to this area. I said, that's ridiculous. It should be an idle zone. So they made it an idle zone. So behind the scenes, I'm proud of a lot of accomplishments that I made.
Well, I think there's two things. You've passed on Herman Lucerne's legacy. You lived his legacy, and in doing so, you've improved your life with the great outdoors and with the Everglades, and therefore we're all better because of you.
Well, I wish I could go back to the days when Herman and I are in the boat coming home and drinking our Grand McNish in a bottle of soda water. That was traditional, having the scotch on the way home. And I miss that man terribly, and we had some great time. Now I'm able to talk about him without crying, but there was a time I couldn't.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We are so honored to have you, as is all the fishing community. Thank you.
I'm honored to have you here, and I think what you're doing with these Millhouse podcasts is history. You're creating history of things that should be remembered.
Thank you.
I applaud you for that.
Thank you. We're honored, believe me.
What I saw is West Side Story. What I saw is just a